All right, so since we're at the top of the hour, hello everyone and welcome to DIME's May 2020 webinar, Digital Therapeutics 101, Enhancing Patient Care. I'm Rachel Chassie, DIME's Director of Innovation, and I am so thrilled to present and to host. The presenting and the hard work will be our guest today, today's webinar. So we are so thrilled to have our good friends, Megan Coder, Executive Director of the Digital Therapeutics Alliance, and Jeff Abraham, VP of Access and Trade at Achille Interactive. Today we'll be talking about defining the field and some evidentiary requirements for successful digital therapeutics products, and also digital therapeutics in the context of COVID-19. But first, let's do some housekeeping. Do please note that today's session is being recorded and today's slides and recording will be made available to you afterwards, so no need to focus on note-taking today. And while Jeff and Megan have created a fantastic presentation, a lot of the fun will happen today in the live Q&A session at the end. So if you have any questions, do feel free to raise your hand in the participant window and I will unmute you to ask your questions live to our guests during the live Q&A portion, or you can always do it the old-fashioned way and type your question into the chat function. Okay, and from that, we'll go ahead and get this party started. Megan and Jeff, I'll hand the floor over to you now.
Well, thank you. It is a pleasure to be here, and I'll be launching off the beginning of the slide presentation and then turn over to Jeff and we'll tag team throughout. And then we really do look forward to the live engagement with the Q&A side. So what I want to do is just bring you up to speed a little bit on what we've been doing from the Digital Therapeutics Alliance side in terms of really making sure that digital therapeutics are well recognized in terms of quality, access, and utilization, especially during this COVID pandemic. So Rachel, let's go ahead and jump in to the next slide. Perfect. So earlier last year, we came together with both DIME and two other organizations to start to create an understanding of what all the types of digital products are out there. So we really worked together and it was a really great opportunity to understand more of what digital health products are in the general sense, alongside of digital medicine products and what digital therapeutics are. And as you'll see, we really have this identified as a bucketing approach where digital health is the broader category, digital medicine sits under digital health, and digital therapeutics under digital medicine. And with Jen and everyone else's assistance, we really started to create ideas around what are those products that require clinical evidence, and then what are those products that require both initial clinical evidence and real world outcomes, and really put together a different framework around this. So it was a fantastic endeavor. It really has helped us start to understand what these products are. But on the following slide, part of this came from the idea of like, what really is the purpose of this and the point? So we talk through the notions around why do product functions and in our perspective claims and risk really matter? And I think it really gets down to these four different stakeholder groups. So from the patient perspective, it really matters if you're using a digital health product that could be addressing a variety of things, you really need to know what it's being used for. Why am I using it? How will it help me? Has someone verified that it's safe and effective, or else is that even necessary? From the clinician perspective, it's important to understand when you have a digital product, what should you be expecting? What type of actionable insights, or are the actionable insights, are you receiving, and how can you use that in the course of practice? Same notions around, do I prescribe this? Do I recommend this? How do I actually use this to relate it to other treatments or therapies that I'm prescribing and are using for my patients? From the payer perspective, obviously you need to know what type of product it is you're covering. How will it actually benefit my patient population? And then the regulatory side, based upon the type of function of a digital product, it'll have a variety of different levels of risk and or then affiliated associations with types of regulatory oversight and clearances that are required. So the next slide is a breakdown of just pulling some of these different notions together. And based upon the type of digital product you have, really determines what the function is. And then once you know the function, then how do I best engage with it in terms of what level of clinical evaluation, regulatory oversight, and real world evidence do the products need? So we presented some examples of products that fit in, again, under that broader digital health landscape versus those that are more in the digital medicine on the measurement and intervention component. And then obviously those that are falling more under that therapeutic side. So I say all this with the notion of when we're talking about digital therapeutics, it's really important for us to be able to talk specifically to the specific type of product. Since we're working with products that deliver an intervention, therefore we need to have a different level of quality that may be assumed or necessary than a general digital health product. That said, as you can tell, a lot of these different functionalities here could be combined into a single product, and we can dive into more of that later, but it wouldn't be uncommon for a digital therapeutic product to have a component of it as an adherence product, or have some way to connect for a clinical decision support perspective. So there are ways to obviously combine and get across these different categories. But anyways, we'll talk today about that therapeutic side. So the following slide is our idea around really what is the definition of a digital therapeutic. And as you see here, we're looking at products that are delivering a therapeutic intervention directly to a patient, and it's making a claim to treat, manage, or prevent a medical disease or disorder. That said, if you are making such a big claim, you have to be able to back it up with clinical evidence, and then also ensure that it's evidence-based in everything that you're doing. So digital therapeutics can obviously be used independently as a standalone product. They can be used by clinicians either from a remote setting or an in-person setting, or they could be paired with different medications, devices, sensors, or therapies to really ensure that there's a holistic treatment paradigm that's being provided to the patient. Since all of those components are so crucially important to the care delivery model, DTA really has stood behind and helped with the creation of patient-centered core principles, ethical standards, and product development best practices that really enable us to start to help patients and clinicians identify, is this good product for me? Does this meet the requirements that it needs to meet? Can I trust it? Is it safe? So those are the things that DTA has been really focused on, and we're really proud of our members for really aligning around these principles to ensure that there's quality across the industry. So on the following slide, we talk through the notions here around access, quality, and utilization. And we'll dive into more of these throughout the presentation. But I think quality is one of the biggest issues that DTA, when we were founded in 2017, we coalesced around as an industry and are still today adhering to those same principles. So if you have a product that has gone through the rigor of, is it a digital health, medicine, or therapeutic? If it's a therapeutic, how do you as an end user or decision maker start to get the sense of, is this a good product for me? Will it work? Will it be safe? And what's that level of quality it has to have to be qualified as a digital therapeutic? And these are the 10 principles that we have put together and that all of our members have really supported throughout their entire process for digital therapeutics. So the first component of a digital therapeutic is the claim. What is it claiming to do? And in our case, it's looking at preventing, managing, or treating a disease or disorder. The second component is what is actually doing that? Is it a software, or else is it a human intervention that's doing it? If it's a software that's going to be delivering that intervention, then it's likely a digital therapeutic. And then going through the others, it's important to understand that you have to have high quality in your design and manufacture processes. Quality management systems are incredibly crucial from a regulatory perspective. You have to be able to engage the end users in every step of the way. If you don't have a patient engagement and an end user engagement in the design process, then the product will likely not work as well, and therefore that intervention will be compromised. So having an end user process throughout the entire way of designing and using and facilitating the distribution of these products is very important. And then the notions around clinical trials is something that I'm really proud of this industry for their leadership on this. So we often talk about having a randomized control trial for the digital therapeutic product itself, and not only having the RCT or a similar type of study, but ensuring that it's been published in a peer-reviewed journal. So it's available to clinicians and patients and end users who want to understand more about the implications of the product and the mechanisms of action. The other aspects we talk about here are around the regulatory side. Different regulatory bodies in different regions will have different levels of oversight required based upon the product risk. And then the notion of real-world evidence is very, very important to digital therapeutics. So ensuring that the product works, that it's functioning properly, it's delivering the right outcomes, and then checking more from that product side all the way through that clinical side, really ensuring that the patients are receiving the therapy that the product is promising to deliver. So that is DTA's 10 principles in a nutshell. That to us has really solidified the core of what constitutes a digital therapeutic. So now moving more into the possibly more exciting aspects of the presentation, I'll turn it over to Jeff, and he'll jump into a little bit more around the benefits to patients and caregivers. And then we'll talk a bit more of how to integrate these into practice. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the COVID pandemic before we wrap up. So Jeff, turning to you. You may be on mute.
I was on mute for a good reason. I wouldn't sell yourself short. I thought that was very exciting. But I do get the fun parts. I will admit that sometimes. So my name is Jeff Abraham. I head up market access and trade for Achille Interactive. We're one of the DTX companies that's part of the DTA. I'm assuming acronyms are okay for this group. I use quite a few of them. Digital therapeutics, part of the reason why I got into it 3 years ago was because of the fact that it's an ability in a way to address current medical conditions from a new angle, or sometimes address conditions that previously don't have any ways to address them. And when I originally started in digital therapeutics, I was actually amazed at the wide variety of diseases and conditions that we were able to address. So when you look at the types of conditions we target, I think in the earlier days of digital therapeutics, because it's been around for quite some time, you had a lot of companies focusing on, I think, diabetes, and that's probably been where you've heard a lot about the space. And though there's still a lot of work in diabetes, today, looking at the companies, there's a lot of work in mental health across depression, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. In neuro, there's Parkinson's, there is work in MS, there's work in stroke recovery, traumatic brain injury, pediatrics, you have work in autism, ADHD. And then even now in the pipeline companies that I think will start coming to the forefront too, you have now even gastrointestinal conditions that are starting to kind of, I'm seeing a lot of companies putting investments into that are hopefully someday going to be up to the standard of a digital therapeutic. So it just is really interesting that we're now leveraging the way that technology can help people. I think we do that in our daily lives. I think in healthcare, as with institutions like DIME and the DTA, we're now really exploring the way we can do that with patients. So not only is it addressing all these conditions, it's a novel way of doing it. It's something that is incredibly accessible. I think that's probably one of the things, especially during this COVID time period, we're seeing being a real benefit to these types of therapies is the accessibility factor. I mean, literally we have people locked in their homes. I know we're all counting. I think I'm up to day 51, maybe 52. I'm not quite sure. So it's even more current today, or acute, but being able to actually meet people where they are, I think is like the dream of medicine, and being able to integrate into their daily lives and really taking down all the hurdles to treatment is something that we should strive for. What's more than that is actually the way that we do it. Being in a DTX company, I can tell you the data that you get on your patients, not so much that you can, not for marketing purposes or not, it's more just the understanding how they utilize your medication or how they use your treatment really allows you to actually figure out a better way, not only to build a more engaging therapy, but also a better way to engage with them to enhance the way that they use their therapy, to help them stay on schedule, to help them with gentle reminders, to kind of help them with their adherence and compliance. And also really, again, tailor it to their personal needs, because on the back end, it's equations and algorithms. So we have the ability to be like, great, you do your therapy at 5 o'clock every day. If you haven't done it by 5:30, maybe we should send you a reminder. And that's just such a novel approach that I think is still not being leveraged enough. And it's something that we do really, really well. And I think it's going to get better and better. I mean, what's interesting with digital therapeutics is with pharma, and nothing against the drug world, it's great, it's where I come from. They can track the fill, we can track the pill. So we can track actually how you're taking your medication and what you're doing, and they just see that you filled a pill bottle. But what if we can make sure that you took it and you took it the most effective way? And that's something that we're doing right now with our patients, and that I think we'll even get better at in the future. It's also something that I don't really see us being necessarily, we are somewhat complementary and supplementary, I think, to existing treatments. Patients are able to keep doing the things that they're doing, whether it's talking to a clinician or seeing a clinician or going through a certain medication regimen, and still use our products. The concept of contraindications with the digital product is something that I have yet to encounter. I'm not saying it won't happen someday, because you never say never, but it's different. And the safety profile of our products in general is something that is admirable, and I think really makes it something that's attractive for patients to try. And I even think someday is first-line therapy, hopefully, for some conditions, because it is so low risk. We're currently working right now and finding the best way to get our products to patients and finding it to be the most accessible. But at the end of the day, how many people on this call don't have at least one smartphone or tablet in their house, or probably within about 3 feet of them? Looking at my desk right now, I might be slightly ashamed. I think I have 2 laptops, 2 tablets, and an iPhone within about 6 inches of me. Maybe slightly unique, but hopefully not that far off. And as the last bullet says on the right-hand side, I think what's also, to Megan's point, we've done great clinical work, and now you're starting to see DTX products not just study how their impact is, but look at how they affect people while being used with things like standard of care for certain conditions, while being used with medications, or while being used with CBT. And I think with other work that DIME's doing around digital biomarkers and around clinical trials, there's some real natural and complementary fits. We can go to the next slide. So for clinicians, now I'm in the pediatric space, so this is kind of an N of 1 with Achilles. We generally get an extreme amount of excitement, partially because we're also delivered in a video game, but also because it's just something where we find that clinicians are usually looking for a way to engage with their patients that will help support their care pathways in the paradigm, but also right now doesn't overburden them. And so we're something where, because of our relationship with patients, I think that we can actually be an extension of the physician or of the care paradigm. A lot of us have developed, whether it's Omada or whether it's WellDoc, or whether it's Big Health, and us at Achilles and Pair as well, we have wraparound care services that actually will talk to the physician if we need them to, but will also support the patient or the physician through onboarding process if they require a prescription. But then also we can give patients information that they can share with their clinicians as well. And that they can go in and say, well, here's how I'm doing it, and here's this objective piece of information. That's something that, again, in the drug world, it's not that that doesn't exist, but people look for convenience and look for kind of everything in one. So where you're able to wrap around both a therapy and then also that communication and data into one package, I think it's something that is very supportive for clinicians and allows them to actually, hopefully, I think it'll build and grow. We have a lot of work to do in terms of integrations and APIs and data sharing, but I think it's something that will help grow. And again, in terms of the clinical decision-making pathways, when you look at a decision tree, I do hope in the future, and I believe in the future, that you'll see that people are going to leverage digital therapeutics to, again, not only treat, but to also kind of capture data and build into these virtual care models of, well, you know, maybe we'll try this first, and not that we won't do your drug at the same time, but we can track you for both. There are some patients who will be like, no, we'll do the digital first and nothing else. And then some patients will be like, no, maybe we'll use digital, you know, second or third step. You know, I think a lot in terms of step edits for pharma or med device. And then again, I don't think there's a clinician out there, having been an ancillary practitioner, that would say, I have everything I need to treat every patient. I think clinicians are constantly looking for, I have this patient that maybe could be appropriate for this, or maybe is not getting the optimal level. And especially when you're in mental health or you're in certain areas where there are no cures, people are looking for ways to safely supplement their current care paradigms to be able to provide always a better level of care or get better outcomes for their patients. Go to the next slide. All right. So this, yeah, okay.
There we go.
So again, I think delivered in practice, I can tell you again, I can always speak to kind of Achilles. We've only got a couple weeks on the market, but I can speak to us, and then some of our other DTA companies I can also speak to. I think what's interesting is you're seeing the DTX products, the way that we deliver value is really changing. And I think what's going to be really interesting in the next year or two, as more of us are coming to the market, or under these COVID guidelines, if some of us have come to the market very rapidly, the way that we are going to be used, that is going to be probably different than we anticipated. You always learn things when you're out in the real world and on the market, and you always tend to actually figure out how you really benefit patients when you're actually out there in the real world. And again, during this COVID time period, I think this becomes even more acute. So right now you have patients that maybe they were being adequately addressed through traditional therapies, and not that we're a replacement, but we may be the only other option. I can tell you the conversations I've had with health insurers and clinicians has changed drastically over the last 2 months, because not only during this time period are they worried about how do we make up for the care that we lost, but the care that they're going to lose going forward, because the return to normal is not going to be this kind of flick of a switch, snap your fingers. I think that, you know, without having access to all their patients, there is definitely a need or a desire to make sure that there's some touch points for patients to have access to healthcare services. And telemedicine is great, and it's been really helpful, but it's probably not able to make up the gap for everything that we're seeing right now. So I think you're going to see a lot of the CBT apps, or CBT digital therapeutics, the digital CBT, digital therapeutics to be specific, we're seeing, and in the conversations that I'm having with those companies, the demand is going to increase. And I don't think it's going to go away. And I think that based on how COVID turns out, this new world that we live in the new normal, I think they're going to become more important. I think when you look at things, that even how pediatricians are doing things, doctors typically go between 3 or 4 offices in an hour. That's not going to be that's not going to potentially be possible anymore if you're worried about infection risk. So just the way that they even collect data and interact with patients, we need to find a way to be more virtual. And I think DTX right now are doing that. We had a patient disease symptom management tracker out there for the past 5 months, and we've seen the uptake go up. And I think that that's not going to change. I think that's actually going to keep going. I think at the bottom point where we need to be probably a little bit more pushy over time, and hopefully this will be a good nudge, is integration into the existing health system workflows. Right now, I don't think it's quite as easy to get prescribed a DTX, or even get access to a DTX, or have the data go back from a non-prescription one to your doctor's office, as it is for certain other piece of information, whether it's from a pharmacy, or whether it's from a or whether it's from patient themselves. I think right now we really need to push for integrations to make sure that all this great information is getting back to healthcare practitioners. And quite frankly, the DTX companies are set up for that to a certain degree. What we can't do is go hospital to hospital, health system to health system, and do integrations. We need a more standardized way to do that. Megan's been aware of some of the work we've been doing with National Council of Prescription Drug Programs. I always have to do a little plug of that. We're about like integrating into workflows for pharmacies and for prescription workflows. And that's been going really great, but it's been a 2-year process. And it's been going really, really well, but the healthcare system typically needs a nudge. And I think we're seeing that nudge right now. We can go to the next one. So an even longer list than what I went into earlier. And it really does, I'll kind of take a minute to digest this. If you go to the DTA website, and you'll see most of the companies are addressing multiple of these, parts of these conditions, or multiple conditions within their product pipelines. I don't see a lot of DTX companies that focus on one product or one disease. They typically are kind of already working out towards the next disease or the next iteration. What's interesting for our products too is our pipelines for development are usually much faster because we're on med device. So whether we're RX or non-RX, we can collect data, we can prove our outcomes, we can get real world evidence much, much more quickly. So we can leverage parts of the tech industry about product market fit. as well as parts of the kind of more pharma med device industry in terms of our data collection standards. I said, I'd be surprised if there isn't somebody on this call that isn't touched by at least one or multiple ones of these conditions, either themselves directly or their loved ones. And the products are out there right now to actually help with these. So next slide.
So this is where I jump in then. And to the last slide, to Jeff's point, thank you, Jeff, for that really great overview. In terms of the disease states that are being addressed, those are the conditions that I've been able to pull from our member company websites that are either on the market or under development. So we're not promising that everything has one of those ready to go, but that is a complete list of all of our member companies' activities and pipelines that are there as of May, I think, 2020. So jumping into the next one here, I think all that Jeff has spoken about in terms of the use for the patients, how clinicians can utilize these and benefit from these, how they can really become an integral component of practice is really crucial. And we'll talk about this in a few moments, but DTA, we launched this urgent access campaign. And as we were doing that, it really occurred to me that it was really important to bring to life these notions around how should these products be utilized, given that they are used in the context of care, given that they are evidence-based, and that given that they are integrated into these clinical workflows for patients, appropriate utilization matters. And when I was in pharmacy school, obviously we talked a lot about the medication rights. So what we've done within DTA's world is start to adapt those to DTX rights. And this isn't saying that we've solved the entire way of what each product should be, how each product should be used, and what the next steps are, but it really gives a better overview, I hope, for clinicians who are needing to authorize a digital therapeutic or use these in the context of patient care, really bringing to light that idea that, oh, is this the right indication? Is this for the right patient? Is this for the right subset of patients? Will this address their needs? Is this the right therapy? Ideas around digital therapeutics that I think are fun to weave into the conversation, that others would assume, it's a digital product, therefore it must, and then fill in whatever idea there is. But the notions around, is the timing right? Is the dosing right? Is the frequency of delivery correct? In terms of this cultural reference idea, the notion around atorvastatin doesn't necessarily need to speak a language for it to be effective, but a digital therapeutic does need to be in the patient's correct language and or cultural reference. So there are ways that obviously digital therapeutics will differ from a traditional medication, but the impact is incredibly measurable. So when you're getting real world data, it's easier to see, okay, a patient's understanding they're doing this, or hey, we have a missed opportunity here. Let's iterate and make the next version of this more applicable to this patient subset, and then track the documentation and outcomes from there. And then the other ideas on the other side of the slide around, and Jeff touched on this, the outcomes documentation. We're able to start to find out when, where, how was the therapy used, what benefits did it provide, and that's given back to a clinician so they can determine the next steps of therapy from a more global standpoint. And therapy responses, and then right evaluation, actionable insights, all of these are a component of a digital therapeutic. So we really, as an alliance, want to highlight the value of these concepts. This obviously isn't an exhaustive list, but we're hoping to start to provide more tools for clinicians as they work with patients to better understand, okay, so this is how it's more manageable, and this is how I can do this and really reap the benefits that are available to us. And then the next one talks around patient and product access. So some of the logistical considerations we've laid out here, really trying to get a better sense for payers and decision makers. What do I need to consider? And a lot of this is like the logistical things that Jeff talked about. In terms of wholesalers, I would love to get to that point where there's a wholesaler notion where we don't have to go hospital by hospital, clinic by clinic, country by country, region by region. And we really have that scalability. And I think the work that Jeff and others are doing with NCPDP, the work we're doing with USP and others will start to help. And this ecosystem is going to continue to evolve, where we'll start to be able to have better platforms and better ways to integrate where there's trustworthy products that have shown levels of rigor that are necessary. And then we can really integrate into a patient's lifestyles as easily as we can do with other medications. And then on this slide, we also just highlighted some notions around the ideas around what else do payers need to consider. Obviously, the logistics matter, but then it's also the ideas around how do I implement, how do I scale, which we've already addressed, clinical appropriateness, which again, we're addressing in previous slides, that patient engagement and sustainability, that is a crucial one that we're going to need to spend more time on. Instead of looking at things that are more around that net promoter scores, what are more specific recommendations we can have from an industry level in terms of how is the patient using this? Are they optimizing their use? Are they benefiting from it? What is that optimal level of utilization? So we have more of an industry specific measure. And then I think that last one around value. Value really matters. So what is valuable to a patient will obviously be slightly different than a clinician or a payer, but getting a better sense of what matters to a patient, going back to having them engage from the onset, what matters to a clinician and a payer really does matter for what the entire industry needs to provide. And then looking at it from that individual and population health level are both two aspects that digital therapeutics can really provide a lot of insight on. So with that, obviously we have more to share there, but let's probably, Jeff, just jump into the next section more specific to COVID. I think we can spend a bit of time here, and then we'll obviously leave quite a bit of time for the Q&A side. And with that, before Jeff comes off mute, beat you to it. I know it's your slide, but I think with what we've seen in the industry, a lot of our efforts this past year, especially the last 4 months, started off on this notion of what value can digital therapeutics provide in a rural health setting or an underserved population setting or a place where people haven't been able to receive the level of therapy that they may need. And we started off with this notion. We started working on a legislative approach. We started working on a regulatory approach. And when COVID hit, it was an interesting time for us to be able to reevaluate and recognize that the same issues we were discussing from the rural health underserved population who may not have access to in-person care as easily as others may, became immediately applicable. So it was an interesting time for us to see the similarities between those two perspectives and helped us really start to dive into what does COVID mean and how can digital therapeutics really be a transformative factor in that. So Jeff, do you want to jump into this one and then we'll just tag team back and forth then from there?
Yeah, sure. To Megan's point, and again, having been on the front line of seeing this, and Megan has too, I think what's changed beyond this, which is kind of not on the slide, is attitudes and prioritization, which I says reprioritizing. But I think actually kind of what people view and also the challenges that people are facing is very, very different. You know, right now, I had a conversation with a health insurer, and I've said this a couple times in the past few weeks. Not that working with health insurers, I do believe, you know, they have their patients' best interests at heart. There are economics of care that matter. That's just the reality of the world that we live in. But the pace with which altruism has come to the front line has been really impressive and heartwarming. And what we've seen is that not only are you seeing the fact that people don't have access to the same care they used to, and I'm sure there are people right now that are stuck in a house with their significant other, and that's stressful. They're not sure what the future is going to hold, and that's stressful, or they have kids running around and that's stressful, and they're trying to balance. And the new normal is creating new stressors and new challenges for us in a new world. And I'm seeing health insurers go, how can we help? And it isn't just about dealing with the stress. It's about what are ways that we can make people's lives better. And that's been, I think, one of the positive unintended consequences of COVID-19 is seeing this altruism come to the front line of clinicians, health systems, payers, PBMs, all going, all right, what can we do to help? How can we make this easier for patients? And I think looking at digital and telemedicine, especially, you now see these two kind of giant industries or industries on the growth curve, telemedicine being bigger. They've been around for a long period of time, kind of seeing this rapid adoption happen. And we're getting a lot of people going, all right, we get how you can help. Now, how do we use you? We can go to the next slide.
So this is one that I wanted to just jump in with. And I think it was a really poignant moment for us in that this was the first time that we've seen the FDA explicitly acknowledge digital therapeutics and their value. So the digital therapeutic perspective of this has been something that DTA has obviously been very proud of and very confident in the ability for these products to really step into this crisis. But as we've started to see from Capitol Hill, the shift of priorities from pre-COVID to during COVID, and then also on the HHS and CMS side, and we're speaking very specific to the United States right now, we have efforts going on in Europe, and we'd be glad to talk to those too. But looking at the US side, it's been an interesting time to see the value of digital therapeutics being recognized, both in examples such as the Cures 2.0 recent document that came out, looking at the FDA guidance document, really stating that given the amount of stress that's being placed on patients and individuals from both the mental health condition and the chronic disease space, digital therapeutics really can play a crucial role in this. So their statement of this so forthrightly was incredibly encouraging to us, but then also puts on a layer of opportunity. I was going to say burden / opportunity for our industry to really step up and deliver what that quality has to be and what that utilization has to be to really ensure that we're delivering safe, effective, meaningful therapies to patients. So this was something that I wanted to add to this deck because it was just something that stood out to us in a really vivid way. In terms of the next slide, it's mine. Then I go to Jeff. So in terms of this slide, DTA, again, earlier this year, we really started working from the lobbying perspective in terms of how do we help the individuals on Capitol Hill start to better understand what a digital therapeutic is and how it could assist and help their constituents, both from the patient and the clinician side. So we started that conversation. We had pretty good receptivity. And then when COVID hit, obviously the focus became so much more vivid on this. So what DTA did is following up with the Capitol Hill and then all the way into HHS was this notion around an urgent access campaign. So how do we start to provide access to patients who need these products and do so in an expedited fashion? And the first phase of our campaign launched with more of that access side. So how do we really ensure that the right payment mechanisms can be in place, that the right quality systems or whatever the case is to ensure the appropriate utilization are in place? The second phase launched late this past week around the notion around quality and that utilization. So providing more insights into this. DTA, we're going to continue to evolve these materials over the time, but we updated the homepage of our website. We created a worksheet for end users to get a better sense of what am I looking for the check marks here in terms of, is this the right product at the right time for me? So this is an evolving process, but it's something that we're really proud to be a part of, given just the importance of this issue and the importance of what we're doing and how they correlate to each other. So Jeff, would love for you to jump into the next two slides.
Sure. So we've seen some real unexpected movers in this space. Besides the fact that we're engaging with legislative side, the FDA came out with I would say, a surprise policy about a week and a half ago.
And that's where that quote was from that I mentioned 2 slides ago.
Yeah.
Yes.
Basically, it was like, if you're in the psychiatric, if you address psychiatric conditions, you can put your product on the market as long as it's low risk and has good data and there's HCP consultation. There are a few other restrictions. This is the title of the guidance, so you can please feel free to go look it up. But companies beyond even this, a lot of companies during this time period have been making their products either more widely available. They've been giving discounts. They're providing it for free to certain populations because they can help. I said Big Health. They have Sleepio as one of their products for insomnia. They're a non-prescription product that has really held the standards of what a digital therapeutic should be, kind of in the highest regard. But we have a product that's an FDA review that we've been very public about, that it's an FDA review, and we're still actively pursuing it. We put it on the market a week and a half ago. I think we did it in about a week's notice. So been a fun couple weeks, I'll tell you that much in that regard. And then last week, Pear announced that they're putting their product for patients with schizophrenia, even before it has a name. They just put it on the market, which again, I think it shows you the speed with which people are reacting. But even the FDA, but the FDA is recognizing that they have the ability to kind of make a difference right now. And they really just gave us the discretion to, hey, put it out there. And we don't know when this is going to end. And we don't know how it's going to work. And and what exactly all the details are. But it was kind of cool because it was like, okay, this is a healthcare crisis. Everybody go do your job, which is if you're there to help people, get out there and do it. And I think what's so unique is even with the drug and the vaccine world right now, which is moving at such an expedited pace, which is awesome, you still have to make sure that it's not going to hurt people or really do much damage. There's still kind of that risk-benefit calculus. For us, the risk-benefit calculus is so different. And so we really have the ability in times like this to expedite what we can do with people. And again, you said prepare, Big Health, and us, like we're already out there right now. Our product's being used by people already.
Another example was, and this is just one example of many, but from Hello Sunday Morning, they're working with a digital therapeutic product right now. And the Australian government just offered a significant amount of coverage for patients who have issues with alcohol use. So it's been encouraging to see different agencies and governments, whether it's Germany, UK, Australia, or others, really start to step up and offer these products too. And then alongside that, I think with what Jeff was mentioning is that real world evidence is really important to keep up with, ensuring that it's being used well and right, and the outcomes are in alignment with what was seen in previous clinical trials or expected otherwise.
I think we can actually probably, the last slide, I think we can actually skip if we want to go straight.
No, I have one comment I want to make.
Okay.
You can go to the next slide and then we'll be good. One of the things, so all of this has been a really multi-company effort. It's been really important to bring everyone onto the same side with each other. So that said, one of the ones that I've really enjoyed so far is working with the US Pharmacopoeia. And we started with them about 2 years ago, but the notion that we're looking at is how do we start to identify what the active ingredient is of a digital therapeutic and inactive ingredients? How do we start to identify what would a monograph look like, similar-ish to what is for drugs? So the notions we're looking at here are how do we really ensure quality? And part of that will eventually, I think, lead us into a world where we can start to identify what would a counterfeit digital therapeutic look like? What would an adulterated digital therapeutic look like? And really ensure that the level of quality that we're talking about is recognized at that medicinal level alongside of all these other treatments. So that has been one thing that I would like to point out here. And though, as all of Jess has said, Jeff has said, I am mumbling like nobody's business today. Anyways, all of these groups have been really instrumental to what we're doing, and DIME's included in that. So it's been really cool to bring this together. I love the mission, I love the passion, I love the vision. So all of that said, it's been a really cool adventure and a really perfect time to be on it with everyone. So that said, I think we can do a Q&A unless, Jeff, you have anything else to wrap up with.
I will wait for Q&A.
Okay, very good. And I'll work on enunciating throughout the rest of the time.
Awesome.
Oh, first of all, Jeff and Megan, excellent job. And Megan, you are not mumbling. You're just giving fantastic information really quickly. But that's why we're recording this, so we can all look back and take our own notes. So this begins the Q&A portion, everyone. As we said previously, do feel free to raise your hand and ask the questions live. That's kind of where the fun happens. Or you can also type your question into the Q&A chat function too. We did have a question that came through, which I think is a really important one to kind of touch on again. We can never be too clear about this information. And so this question is both for Megan and Jeff. How would you differentiate between wellness products, the ones that we know as, a smartwatch that checks your steps or how much sleep you got in a night? How are those different from a medical device or one that is a digital therapeutic?
I'll take the first pass, and then Jeff can do the correction. This has actually been something, though, that we have come back to since we started. The notion of a product that will either track data or provide data to the end user for decision and or the clinician for decision is going to be very different level of product function and claim than a product that's actually delivering an intervention itself. So an example that I would consider is if you have a product that says, hey, you should walk more often, and we want to encourage you in that, that's a great product to have. But it's very different than a product that says, hey, your last insulin dose was this, your last blood glucose level was this, therefore you now need to take 6 units of insulin right now. And it's that notion of that intervention being delivered to the patient that is why you need to have it clinically evaluated and approved as necessary from the regulatory components to really ensure that it's not making a mistake or an error. So there are a variety of ways to break it down, but I think it really goes down to what is the product claiming to do? And that then goes to those first charts around, if it's looking at more of the informational side versus the actual measurement component or the therapeutic intervention side. Jeff, thoughts?
Yeah, and this is actually the follow-up question, or there's a few. Good. I agree with Megan. A lot of it, just from the manufacturer side, a lot of the way we look at it is exactly what Megan said on the data. What does it do? But then it also comes down to, there's also an FDA kind of guideline to this as well, in terms of like what claims you can make are differentiated by also what you categorize yourself at, or what processes you go through, and what data you have. So I think there's also that component to it as well. So it's not so much a prescription, non-prescription thing necessarily. It really is a matter of what does your product do.
So I think that gets, so I'm looking here and I see the regulatory pathway question.
Yeah.
Given on the region that you go to market in will depend on what regulatory requirements you're subject to. So if you're in Europe, you're more likely to have to undergo the CE marking process through a notified body under the new MDR. And the classifications are laid out based upon the product claim and function. So once you have that CE mark, then that certification, then you go to the individual countries and register there. Once you do that, you may have a country level registration process, in addition to potentially a local level regulatory and or access process. So every single country in Europe does have a different process, although it does follow along with that notion of CE marking first, and then you move on to the subsequent steps from there. In terms of the United States, FDA has laid out pretty clearly what claims that Jeff is mentioning you have to undergo. You could undergo a variety of different pathways. You could be a variety of different classes. I don't think we've seen a class 3 digital therapeutic yet. There's one.
I don't know if you qualify, but there's a company that did some blood pressure work at one point that they classified as an older one, Megan, from like 2012. Like I've only ever heard of one company even ever mention it, and they weren't in the DTA. They just said, we're a class 3 med device. We consider ourselves a digital therapeutic. But
so the notion though that most are class 1, class 2, you can undergo 510K pathway or de novo. We can nerd out on that later. But there is a very set structure of the claims you're allowed to make, or how you have to go through the process based upon the risk. And claims are directly correlated to risk. And even if you look at the UK, the evidence for effectiveness standards by NHS and NICE, they lay out very specifically in terms of what is the product claiming to do, therefore what is the level of risk, therefore what are the levels of clinical evidence you must have, and the levels of cost effectiveness that you have to be able to prove to be used in the NHS system.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for that. Thanks for that great overview from you two. We have a live question from Skip Ashmore. I think, Skip, you are now unmuted. Would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, I think some of this was, first of all, a great webinar, really enjoying it, learning a lot. And I think some of this was just addressed by that last question, but could maybe give us some specific examples of the regulatory pathways with specific products that you guys are aware of, and what exactly, how were they classed, and what kind of studies, if any, had to be done, whether they were on the bench or they were in a clinical setting?
So I don't speak, since I'm at that industry level, I don't really speak to individual products all that much. I could pass it to Jeff, but I also know you can probably not speak for other companies either.
No, so speaking from our experience and knowledge at Achilles, and then what you've seen get cleared already, because there are products that have been cleared as class 2 and class 1. The level of data and evidence, we're treated as med device, so it's less so much that it's a standard for digital therapeutics versus other med device. Class 2 is a medical device. So the studies can vary. They don't typically go up to the same size and rigor as a drug study, meaning like they may not go out for a year or two. That's just the way med device works. Some of the companies are holding themselves to that standard voluntarily. And I think what you're seeing is a mixture of de novo and 510K, just depending on whether or not you have more for class 2, whether or not your product has something that is already set a class. So for a product like Achilles, though, I think we actually have said it, like we're more de novo pathway because there isn't a predicate technology that we can leverage, versus in the diabetes space where there are ones that have 510Ks approved as both prescription and non. There are predicates that they can use, or they've already been de novos. There are predicates they can use in that pathway. And then there's the wellness guideline, and then there's enforcement discretion, which we've seen as well.
On FDA's website, we have, if you go to the DTX product page, part way down, we have a list of some of the regulatory clearances that FDA has granted to some of our member companies. It's just a PDF in the far right-hand side of the screen, but we did want to at least provide an example. I alphabetized them wrong at one point. But aside from that, it's a decent list to at least reference to get a better sense of the types of products that have received clearances already, and as far back as 2010.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Okay, we've got a great question here from Mike DeMarco. He's asking, where have you experienced the most traction or challenges from a payer perspective for reimbursing digital therapeutics?
Megan, you want to take? I'm just kidding.
I mean, from a global perspective, I will at least start. I think from a global side, we have started our efforts within DTA to start to better help payers understand what these are, how to differentiate and diversify between the many types of digital apps, both literally and figuratively, that are on their desk every week, month, and year. So we're trying to start to do that. I think the work that AMCP, the Academy of Managed Care Pharmacists, is doing is starting to get a better sense of this too, in terms of what would a formulary submission look like for a digital therapeutic? What would a P&T committee need to start to consider? So there are industry level notions that we're looking at, but obviously, Jeff, your point on the specific ideas.
Yeah, so, you know, there's starting to be more archetypes of payers that I've experienced in terms of how they look at digital therapeutics. I mean, payers is a very broad term. It includes, like, you know, self-funded insured employers, PBMs, health insurers, integrated delivery networks. I can tell you this, I'd probably say 2.5 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, was my first conversation. What was really interesting was I was having to define what a digital therapeutic was before I even got into our product. I don't have to do that anymore, or digital medicine. It's become much more pervasive. So the conversations have already kind of expedited themselves. And I see a lot more. There are some companies like Express Scripts, it's not a free plug, they have a digital formulary. They have been on the forefront of this. That's just pretty objective. They have been. Not that other PBMs like CVS Caremark or maybe we have Blue Cross of California, not that they're not, you know, kind of also in Kaiser, not, you know, there's a ton, Vital from Highmark. There's what?
Yes, they're all doing a good job.
Yeah, they're all doing a great job. But there are some that are still kind of like, well, we've heard this as a buzz phrase. Like I remember having a conversation with the health insurer and they're like, if you're not in anxiety, depression, or diabetes, then we don't have the remit to kind of talk to you and explore working with you as a digital therapeutic. And that was, so you could kind of, so I said, go look at this digital thing. We hear it's important. It's a buzz phrase, but they weren't really ready for it. So there's definitely like a spectrum right now. And I do kind of see archetypes of what's happening, but a lot of people are going to follow, I think, what Express Scripts did, just because it's very public and it provides a good framework.
Excellent. Thanks, guys. That was kind of a doozy of a question. I appreciate you guys taking that one on. All right, our next question comes live from Venu Malarapu.
Yeah, hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you. Megan, Jeff, excellent session. Enjoyed it so far. Great information. My question is for uptake for digital therapeutics in lieu of COVID in the ongoing as well as probably new randomized clinical trials, and what's the level of uptake you are seeing from your broader perspective and knowledge, and also what are some of the challenges that you are seeing in while there is opportunity, but what are some of the challenges that teams are facing in leveraging it more than what they currently are? I appreciate your response. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Again, I'll start just the broader industry idea. In the United States specifically, again, there's very different models taking place sort of globally. But in the US, right now, digital therapeutics are generally covered on the private side. On the public side, very few patients, if any, have coverage by Medicare or Medicaid. And that is a challenge that we're facing right now and trying to work with HHS and CMS on to really help educate them and help them understand what are the specific types of products that have met these quality standards and can be used by patients, and what's the value that will be provided to them? How do we really ensure that they're supporting clinicians, enhancing that patient-clinician relationship? So those are the types of concerns that we've just seen on the public side in the United States. And given that a lot of the populations who are being affected really significantly by COVID are under those two umbrellas, it's really important for us to really work closely with their agency to help them with this. So it's an indirect answer, but that's one of the biggest challenges that we've seen with COVID. In terms of how the individual products are working when they are being used, obviously we're promoting the real world evidence being developed every step of the way, and that is going back and pointing directly to what has already been done in a clinical trial. But Jeff, you probably have much more to say from the, again, more specific side.
A lot. And so we haven't commented on our uptake, and we've only been out for a couple of weeks. And like I said, we're out in this kind of limited use. We have seen, and we don't have any marketing behind kind of what we're doing necessarily. You don't see our product out there advertising because, again, we're treating this as more of a healthcare crisis. We've seen a lot of interest and a fair amount of uptake. I think some of the challenges, and this was an earlier question in the Q&A too, I think some of the challenges that are still coming out now is the best way to educate clinicians about these products. I mean, they're right now just being bombarded with remote patient care. And it was about a year ago to the date almost. I think we're like a week and a half off from the digital medicine symposium we had at Harvard. I think that was a year ago. And
seems like 20 years ago, but yes.
It was a year ago. And like,
it's a while.
I remember talking to John Toros from Beth Israel, and he had a presentation about how they evaluated just apps at the time, not necessarily digital therapeutics, but some of these measurement tools and things like that. I don't think that has actually changed a ton yet. And that's partially because, you know, where there's a lot of areas for us to address. And I think the industry has done a great job in the last year. And organizations like DIME have really ramped up their education efforts as well. I still think until a lot of our products are on the market though, which there are some, it's hard to be like, this is one and this isn't necessarily. It kind of has to be almost like, here's an example, here's one that you could use. And so I think as we're getting out there more from the manufacturer side, I'm having a lot of conversations with pediatricians and psychiatrists about what not just our product is, but what a digital therapeutic is, because now it's applicable to their patient population. And I think that's something that's going to become very acute to figure out how to educate them very quickly about our products. Like in this time period where you can't really detail like a pharma company used to or a rep. So how do you get clinicians up to speed and comfortable with the fact? And also answering some of we get a lot of questions like, how do I use it? How do I prescribe it? Or how do I get the data back? And it's not necessarily about like what a DTX is. It's really, how do I incorporate this into my practice? And until it's something that was a practical issue for them, it wasn't in the forefront of what they were necessarily looking at. And that's something that I think is going to be a little bit of a challenge for the next few months that we have to figure out very rapidly.
Okay, all right. Well, it breaks my heart that we can't get to every single question that was asked. We have some really interesting ones that I wish we could just go on and on for hours about this, but we all unfortunately can't do this right now. So thank you everyone for your engagement in today's presentation. Thank you, Megan and Jeff, for, of course, excellent content as always. And thank you, Megan, for your excellent service on DIME's Strategic Advisory Board. Great work. And also, Jeff, we're also really grateful for your excellent work on our Scientific Leadership Board. Thank you so much from DIME. And of course, with DIME, we always have so much content coming. So if you have more questions about the Digital Therapeutics Alliance and more questions in general about this topic, this is a great place to start. Check them out. They're the first place I recommend anyone to go to when they have any questions about digital therapeutics. And of course, we got a lot more with DIME here. So we'll always have content coming out. And so this week, actually, because it's May, if you can believe it or not, we have our next virtual journal club where we talk with Abhishek Pratap from Sage Bionetworks about his most recent publication in an Ask Me Anything style live conversation. So if you're interested in this topic, and if you've actually never had the privilege of hearing Abhi present, go ahead and indulge yourself. And then we also have our next event at the end of the month for lightning speed crowdsourcing over the broad topic of patient engagement. We're right at the top of the hour, so thank you again to Megan and to Jeff and for the great presentations you gave us today on digital therapeutics. You'll see again the recording and the slides available soon, and thank you all so much for coming today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.